We are now recording as well. Okie dokie. Good afternoon, Leslie. How are you doing?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Good. Right, as Jonathan can hear us, everybody else can see and hear us. Today we are going to be doing another 100 years from the year 200 through to the year 300 in the Common Era. As we learned already last week, the previous century sees the redaction of the Mishnah by Rebbe Yehuda HaNasi, and this is the writing down of the sayings of the rabbis from the previous 300-400 years from the time right at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. But we're going to be moving out of the land of Israel and going along mainly, although there are still a number of events that take place within Israel, but mainly within Babylon, Bavel, or along the shores of the river Tigris and Euphrates in Iraq. Rebbe redacts the Mishnah in 190. He passes away in the year 195. And that's where we start from, with the journey of a man by the name of Rav. Rav is literally a title, in the same way as Rebbe was a title. His name was Rebbe Yehuda HaNasi, but he gives the title of Rebbe. Rav, his name was Rav Abba Arichter. He was a tall man, but he's known as his title of Rav. So you got Rav and Shmuel. So Rav moves along to Babylon. Rav's actual birthplace was in Babylon. He'd been born there. He'd moved along to Israel during the time of Rebbe. He actually tries to get semicha. We'll see later on he's not able to get semicha, but in around the year 220, he moves along to Bavel and he sets up a yeshiva system there. But the advantage of Bavel, Babylon, was the language that they spoke then in Bavel was Aramaic, which of course was very similar to the Hebrew Lashon HaKodesh that they were used to doing. And the Gemara, therefore, is made up mainly in Aramaic. It was the language of the street in Israel as well. And it just made the translation between the two countries so much easier that the languages were so similar. Although you will notice at times when we're learning the Talmud, the Mishnah has said, we've had last week with the different items that an animal can go out with on Shabbos, so different straps. But the Mishnah gives its word in it, and the Gemara starts off, okay, what is this word? Before we get down to the halacha, we need to know the word. Language was so important, and so when they were moving, Bavel sounded like a very good place for them to go to. It was also from a religious perspective. Of course, it was a birthplace of Avraham, so it felt good. But there was already a shul in Bavel, in Iraq, in a place called Chutzal, that was founded by Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, at the time of the destruction of the first temple. So we're going back to the 6th century BCE. There was already a shul there. So when Rav comes along there in the beginning of the 3rd century CE, there'd already been a shul that had been there for 700 years. And in fact, in Naharadia, which we'll learn about later on, there was a shul that was established there even during the time of the first temple, so even earlier than that. And the Talmud tells us, let's open up the right one. I'm going to share a screen with you for a minute. And let's make sure we get the right one over here. Share that one. And no, not you, wrong one. You want to be sharing this one over here. Can you see a Talmud in front of you?
Yeah.
Good,
Yeah.
right, yes, okay. Let's make sure we get the right one.
I just read this morning.
Pardon?
Lady, tall man.
Yeah, we get to that in the morning.
Yeah.
So here the Gemara Megillah, the Gemara asks, where in Babylonia does a divine presence reside? Abaya said, in the ancient synagogue shul of Chuzal, and in the shul that was destroyed and rebuilt in Naharadia. And these are shuls that go back, as I say, 700-800 years. The one that was done in Naharadia had taken some earth from Jerusalem, from the first temple, and had actually used it as a foundation. You know, nowadays when they set up a shul, they will often try to have like the foundation stone, the Evan Apina, when we're setting it up there. Ian should recognize his wordings. Evan Ma'asu Haboinim Haisal Reish Pina. The throne that was thrown away becomes a foundation stone. So they would take these stones, not necessarily be thrown away, but to set up your shul with a stone from around the grounds of the temple was obviously, it saw the continuity. There had already been something called the Reish Galusa, which was not yet fully established, but literally the head of the exile, even during the times of the temple, if you're not within Israel, so those that were living in Babylon had leaders there, they were descended from the house of King David. Later on, during the time that we're going to be discussing now, the Reish Galusa had a very important position. They worked together with the Babylonians. They were given authority, temporal authority. From time to time, they interfered with the halachic authority. In fact, Rav, when he goes along initially to Bavel, he is given a job in order to be responsible for all of the weights and the measures in the town. So if anybody was coming and said, I've been cheated out of, I bought a certain weight of flour and I got less than that, so you'd have to have who is going to say, and in fact, I think is in France, nowadays they've got the standard 1 kilo weight, which is kept in a sealed chamber. You've got, what is a kilogram? Well, in times of the Chumash, of course, we speak about a shekel. The shekel is not a denomination, it was a weight. So Rav gets asked to do this job. He refuses, and in fact, for a while, he gets thrown into jail by the Reish Galusa, although later on, when we have Mar Ukva, who was the Reish Galusa, the head of the Jews in exile, he very much supports financially, religiously, and legally the position of the rabbis. And it's because of someone like Mar Ukva, who lives for a long time, that Rav and Shmuel's students and their students are able to continue the line, because bearing in mind, everything that takes place now is going to be developed into the Talmud. Previously, Rabbi puts together the Mishnah, but everything that happens in this century, the next, and even the one after that, is going to be developed into the Talmud. The rabbis at the time of the Talmud are the Amoraim, from Omar to say, times of the Mishnah are the Tanoim. We have the names. Let's see if anybody would like to give a guesstimate of how many Amoraim are known by name during the time we're going from 200 until 400. So over 200 years, 2 to 250 years, how many are known by name and are mentioned within the Talmud?
36.
300, 400.
50.
A few more than 36, would you say, Ralph?
300 or 400 maybe.
50.
1,800. We know by name 1,800 Amoraim who are set up there, who, of course, some are more famous than others. Some are quoted time and time again. Others may only be mentioned once. But this is the yeshiva system set up by Rav. Now, the other advantage of Babylon at that time is that even though it was part of the Roman Empire, it doesn't get involved in all of the mishigas that's taking place in the Roman Empire at this point. Bearing in mind, in fact, for one very important reason, it's a poor place. And the Talmud actually says that one of the reasons Rav went back there was because of the poverty. And so because of that poverty, there were less distractions in setting up the yeshiva system. And we know it's been like that for a while. 2 lessons ago, we learned about Hillel, the famous Hillel. He was a Babylonian. And in fact, we learned the Talmud, which describes how humble he was. And the famous story of how he comes to prominence, he goes to the yeshiva. He can't afford the few pence it costs to go in. So he lies on the roof outside, and then one day gets caught in the snow, and they see his body through the sunlight. Babylon, from at that point, was a very poor place, so it had less distractions. Although the flip side is that sometimes we say the fact that it's poor, they also were satisfied with a lower degree of scholarship. So therefore, when Rav turns up, having a leader like that was good for them because this now elevated them. If you try to break in to a market, I think it was David Kennedy that told me the story of the two guys that go off to Africa in order to sell shoes. One guy, comes back and says, it's a waste of time. Nobody wears shoes. The other man says, it's brilliant. There's no competition. Send as many shoes as you can get. So that there are two sides to it as to what's going to be good or bad. So on the one hand, the Talmud says that the poverty and the lack of learning, structured learning at that point in Bovel was good. On the other hand, it does sometimes hinder them in their development of their learning. Just to have a look at the Mishigas that was going on at that point within Rome. So if we're thinking of the different leaders and emperors that there are at that point, you've got Caracalla is murdered in the year of 217. His murderer is Macrinus, who becomes Caesar. He's assassinated a year later. Then you've got Elagabalus, emperor. He's murdered in 222. He's only there for 4 years. You've got Alexander Severus, manages to calm things down until 235. So you have 11 years of a little bit of calm. But from the majority of the time that we're looking at, so up until 222, and then from 235 until 284, you've got 19 different emperors on the throne in Rome. And every single time they're going along, each new emperor wants to raise money for his army. He raises that money through the taxes. And Judea, or Palestine, as the Romans called it at that point, was a terrible path because the Roman army kept going through it. Babylon may not have been much further away, but it was a little bit out of the sphere of influence of the Romans, and so they left them alone. They were a shielded, protected environment, and we've already mentioned the Reish Galusa. The Babylonians also saw it being advantageous to them if they allowed the Jews to rule themselves. And from time to time, it does cause, Ian is going to ring me up later on in the week and tell me he's learned something now. It caused them to be fractious. We argued with one another, and that caused problems. But by and large, having a Reish Galusa, the head of the exile arch, the head, was very much advantageous. So Rav goes along to Israel. Now, he could have been a Tana. He could have been of the rabbis at the time of the Mishnah, but he does not get semicha. The word semicha literally means v'somach yodei, to place the hands. In Ivrit, a semicha in Ivrit means a bed covering because it rests on top of you. In the times of the temple, when you're bringing a sacrifice, you had to rest your hands on it. The first person to ever give semicha was the first person to give semicha. Moses gives it to Yehoshua. Hashem tells him to place one, and Moshe goes along out of humility. He puts both hands to show that he's really giving it over. Rav wants to get smicha from Rebbe. In order to get smicha from Rebbe, he would be qualified to be a member of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin continues going along for a while. In fact, continuing from the time of Hillel for a number of generations. Rav wanted to get it. He goes to Rebbe. For the Gemara in Sanhedrin 5a tells us that Rebbe refused to do it. Afterwards, Rav goes along to Rebbe's son, Rabban Gamliel III, and asks him to get smicha. And he says, if my father didn't give it to you, I can't give it to you. And it's at that point that Rav moves to Bovel. So we're in the year 220 when Rav goes along to Bovel. Before he gets there, he writes a number of books, most notably the Sifra, the Sifri, and the Mechilta. Why are these important? Because they sit side by side with the Medrash, and they form a commentary on the Chumash. The Mechilta is on the book of Shemos, the Sifra is on the book of Vayikra, and the Sifri are on the books of Bamidbar and Devarim. There is no record of him having written one on the book of Bereshis. Maybe he did. It's been lost to time. Maybe he didn't. Could be he started with Shemois, because that's when the Jewish nation began. But these commentaries here are probably, if we put it side by side with the Medrash, they are bear in mind, Rashi is not around until the 11th century. The main commentary that they have at that point is Targum Onkelos, which is mainly just a translation. So the Mechilta, the Sifra, and the Sifri are a major commentary on the books of Shemois, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim. He also writes or composes or reintroduces a number of things that you should all know. Number one, Aleinu. Everyone recognizes Aleinu. We say it every single day, 3 times a day, Shachris, Mincha, Mariv. Now the Gemara tells us that Joshua composes it when we go into the land of Israel. The same time he also composes the second bracha of benching. But it would seem that this had been forgotten, and Rav is the one that reintroduces Aleinu. It's our duty to give thanks. It would also make sense because in it as well there is the line which is changed, included, excluded in various versions of the Siddur of Shehei Mishtachvim Lahavel Volarik Umispalim El El Lo Yeshia, that they pray to emptiness and nothing and pray to a God who does not save them. It makes sense that Rav is reintroducing this and may have inserted this sentence over here, which is why it's in brackets. Not everybody says it, because around this time is just when Christianity is on the rise. Bearing in mind, it's not going to take too long. It's in 316 when Constantine sets up the Council of Nicaea and they really establish Christianity as a Roman religion. But at this point, they're an ever-growing band. You've also got the Samaritans driving everybody mad. So Rav reintroduces this. Initially, it was only said in Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. He says that it should be done every single day. The other bits that Rav introduces, one, Vatoidienu, when a festival is on Motzei Shabbos, that's the Amida, which the Talmud describes as a gem. But the third one, which you will all recognize, and those of us that learned, we're still doing Daf Yomi already back on Brachos earlier on, we learned of the number of Yehirot signs. Bear in mind, the Amida ends at the end of the bracha of Sim Shalom, Mincha Marv, Shalom Rav. The last paragraph, Elikayin Etzoy L'Sheni, that is an addition. And the Talmud and Brachos gives us that's why it's not repeated in the repetition. That's why if you're in the middle of that paragraph, when the Shliach Sibur is doing the Chazar Sashatz and it comes up to Kedusha, you can actually reply at that point. Earlier on, you can't. But that last paragraph, the Talmud says that there were a number of different ones. Each rabbi composed their own. The one that we have, Elikayin Etzoy, is one that was chosen to be added into our Siddur. But the one composed by Rav, you also all know. It's the Rosh Shabbos Mevarchim Yehirot Zayin. When so the long Yehirot Zayin, Chaim Shal Shalom, Chaim Shal Ava, the long one, Shetitin Rana, that was composed by Rav. At this point, it was his personal prayer. We utilize it 11 times of the year, Shabbos Mevarchim. Of course, we don't do it Shabbos Mevarchim Tishrei. We don't bless the month of Tishrei. There's also a long prayer which we say on Rosh Hashanah after the blowing of the shofar. When it comes time, please God, we'll be back in shul. When it comes to Rosh Hashanah, you'll see there the beautiful prayer composed by Rav. It's one of the earliest piyutim that we have. The other thing that Rav sets up is something called Yarchei Kala. Yarchei Kala is still practiced today, and Yarchei Kala literally means the light months. Yerech is the moon, another way of referring to the moon in Hebrew, Levana, or the Yerech, but Yarchei Kala, the light months. Those were the months of Elul and Adar. So the month before Rosh Hashanah, the month before Pesach, they would open up the yeshiva to students, either to alumni or to regular workers who couldn't afford to spend all the time learning, would turn up to the yeshiva 2 months of the year and send and bring with them the questions. Now, interesting enough, we'll learn more about this when it comes up to the time of the Gaonim. That's from the 6th up until the 10th, 11th centuries, when Judaism had spread further afield. Not only would people go along to study in Yarchikala, but if you were too far away and you didn't have any authority, a recognized rabbinic authority in the town, they would save up their halachic questions, and an emissary would be sent out on either of those months to go to the yeshiva of Surah or Pumpadisa, mainly Surah as we're going along, in order to get their answers. So nowadays, if I don't reply to somebody's question that they've WhatsApped me, at 12:04 a.m., if I've not replied by 12:15, Rabbi, did you get my WhatsApp? Yes, it's midnight. It's midnight. Then, in order them to get an answer, you sometimes had to wait 6 months in order for the answer to be given. Although its system was set up by Rav not for that, but it was primarily to allow alumni or people that could not afford to spend the entire year learning to turn up for 1 month of the year, bearing in mind that they wouldn't have been traveling as they were later on from Europe. They would mainly have been coming from Babylon itself, possibly from Israel. And at times we would have a lot of discussion there and back. The seat of authority is still Israel. And this is the one which annoys all of you, because there is a famous Gemara when it says, Sholchu mitzom, they sent from there. Hashta diadina igbasa de yarcha. Now that we are well versed in the setting of the yarcha, the moon, we still need to keep 2 days Yom Tov. What do you mean they sent from there? This was the men in Bovel, which is the east, sends to Israel. And they ask them the question. And Israel gives the answer, sorry boys, in the diaspora, you still need to keep 2 days Yom Tov. This is happening at this time. It's not later on, because by the time we come to 350, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Hillel has already set up the calendar as we know it. It's before the calendar that we know now. It's during these 200 years after the destruction of the temple, before the calendar of Hillel, not the original Hillel and Shammai, but Hillel the second, setting up the calendar. And the question is asked, whether it was asked in this century or in the beginning of the 4th century, I don't know, but it's at this time they send the question and they still send it to Israel. Even with the great yeshivas being set up in Babylon, they still want to have things confirmed. Or, this is that we learned last week, Rav Shiri Ragon said, what used to happen in each town, they would ask the Beis Din. They had a tradition, they would tell them. If they didn't, they would go to a larger city. If they didn't know, they would go to Jerusalem. If in Jerusalem they didn't know, they'd go to the small Sanhedrin that sat at the gate of the temple. If they didn't know, they would go to the big Sanhedrin that sat inside the temple. So there's always been this progression. Still now, temple destroyed, the Sanhedrin having moved, and it's now based in Tiberias. They still send along. It's when Rav was not given smicha that he realizes he has to go along, and he sets up his yeshiva in Bavel. When he goes there, he meets a man by the name of Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel are two of the most famous names of the Talmud, and we often see Rav u'Shmuel da'omit havayo, Rav and Shmuel, who both say. Now, I'm just going to turn up on the screen how Rav and Shmuel first met. Their relationship to begin with started off slightly rocky, to say the least. Let's move this one out of the way, please. And I want to get to Shabbos 1088. So Shmuel and Karna were sitting on the bank of the Malka River. They see the waters rising and murky, and Shmuel says, a great man is coming from the west. So if they're in Bovel, west is Israel. His intestines are aching and the water is rising to greet him. Shmuel, as well as being the head of the yeshiva, was an astronomer and a doctor. So I'm not sure whether over here he was using his powers of astronomy or his powers as a doctor to know that this man that was coming along had a bad stomach. Go and sniff out his container. I see if he's a Torah scholar. Kana goes and finds him. He's a sage that's come from Israel, and he asks him a number of questions. And so number one, he goes along about writing tefillin can only be on a kosher animal. He goes along. Then he looks along about prohibited blood, the blood that we're not allowed to eat, that would make a woman ritually impure, red. He goes along, he tells him that. He asks him a number of other questions here, about a bris milah, or about orla, fruit in the first 3 years. Interestingly enough, when Rav sets up his yeshiva, he plants around the yeshiva a vineyard, an orchard, and the bochurim in yeshiva are sustained from the food along there. I'm going to go all the questions to him, and then he says, "No, what are you doing here? Why are you testing me?" He says, "What's your name?" Karna. So the word karna is a horn, that a horn will emerge in his eyes. This was not having a go at Karna, but at Karna's teacher, i.e. Shmuel. Ultimately, Shmuel brings him to his house. He feeds him barley bread, small fried fish, and beer to drink. But he did not show him from the lavatory, and so he'd suffer from diarrhea. Why? Shmuel was a doctor. He realized that Rav's problem was that there was, I'm not sure whether it's the technical term would be backup blockage. So he had constipation further up, and he wanted to get the system moving again. But Rav wants to go to the toilet. He's unaware, and he curses him. And he says, "Whoever causes me suffering, let his children not survive." Even though Rav later on found out that Shmuel was trying to do him something good, nevertheless, Shmuel's children did not survive long. Later on, the Gemara in Baba Kama, we have Rav and Shmuel going there, and neither one would enter in front of the other. Shmuel would not enter before Rav Asi, because he thinks he's greater. Rav Asi won't go before Rav, because Rav's a teacher. And in the end, they decided Shmuel stayed behind. Rav and Shmuel walked in together, at Rav and Rav Asi, and then Shmuel enters in. Their friendship to begin with started off very, very rocky. Shmuel had the best of intentions. He wanted to, suss out, does this sage know what he's talking about? It's coming from Israel. Does he know what he's talking about? And B, Shmuel is a doctor who's trying to cure Rav. Rav doesn't take kindly to it, curses Shmuel, feels bad, but at the end of the day, tzaddik goes of our Kodesh Baruch Hu say when a tzaddik curses, the Almighty listens. We have the same thing in the Torah. When Yaakov and Rachel, after Yaakov flees from Lavan comes along and says, "You've stolen my gods." He searches, he says, "Amongst whomever you find them will die." Now, Lavan doesn't actually find the idols. And the Pasuk says, "V'lo yada Yaakov ki Rachel terafim." Yaakov does not know that Rachel has stolen them. Now, even though Yaakov only said, "amongst whom you find them," nevertheless, the curse does come true. Rachel dies early on. She dies in childbirth, even though so got to be very careful before you curse anyone. But Rav and Shmuel have that relationship, and they both set up their yeshivas. Rav sets up the yeshiva in his birth town of Surah. Shmuel sets it up in Nahardia. Eventually, the one of Nahardia closes down. David, are you raising your hand there? Scorer.
No, sorry, I'm writing.
Sorry. Eventually, the one set up by Shmuel in Nahardia stops, and it gets, when Shmuel passes away, and it gets restarted by his students in Pumbedisa. These two yeshivas continue along, as we learned the other week, up until the year 1030. If we go along, Rav Haig, we learned last week the letter written by Rav Shiriragon in the year 990. He's in the yeshiva of Pumbedisa, And that had been going along since it was set up. Shmuel sets it up in 220 in Nahardia, then continues along in Pumbedisa. The last one there is Rav Hai Gaon, and in the Yeshiva of Surah, set up by Rav. The last two rabbis there are Rabbi Azariah and Rabbi Yitzchak. Again, they end roughly the same time in the year 1030. They both end then, and that's when we're moving along to Europe, when we have the time of Rashi, but we won't get to that for another 7 weeks. You've got to wait until we get along there. We've got a lot of time to go through before then. Rav passes away in the year 247, the age of 85. But Alan, yes?
Sorry, can I just ask you on this stage?
Yes.
Did Rav get Smicha eventually?
No.
Never got it?
No. But let's differentiate between the smicha then and the smicha now. That was real smicha, and in order to get smicha, you have to have smicha from somebody who himself got smicha in Israel. Well, that stopped. It stopped after the destruction of the temple. So the smicha that we have nowadays is nothing like it at all. It's given the same name. It's a rabbinical ordination, but it is not the smicha that will allow you to sit on a Sanhedrin. So when we say that Rav didn't get smicha, we're not saying, oh, well, he's not a rabbi. It's Gevein Rav. In fact, his name is Abba Richter. He gets only known as his title as Rav. Rav wasn't his name. Everyone's called Rav. Rav this, Rav that, Rav the other. He was such a great rabbi that we don't even refer to him by name. We refer to him as Rav. The only other person that has that is Rebbe. Rebbe Yehuda Anossi is the only other one who's known as Rebbe. Again, his name was Yehuda, but he's known as Rebbe because of his greatness. So the fact that Rav didn't get smicha, God forbid to compare it with someone like myself, he was a Rav. He couldn't sit on the Sanhedrin, because he hadn't got that smicha, which goes in an unbroken chain the whole way back to the time of Moshe. Already, right after the destruction of the temple, the Romans forbade, and we learned the Gemara the other week, how the Romans forbade about smicha. So what did one Rav do? Because whoever got smicha, they would be killed, and everyone in the city next to it. So he sat on a mountain in between two great big cities, gave smicha to 5 students. They get caught, the students run away. They tell him, Rebbe, you run. He says, they're going to catch me. I'll stay here, you run. I've done my job. And in fact, Rav, I'll get to in a second, Rav's uncle, who was Rav Chisda. Rav's uncle, let me just make sure we get the right one. Is it Rav Chisda? Sorry, Tim. But Rav's uncle, let's make sure I got the right one. Rav Chia. Sorry, I do apologize. Not Rav Chisda, Rav Chia. Rav's uncle, Rav Chia, was also called the Arichta Tulman. He was a student of Rebbe. And Rav Chia had also come from Bovel. He'd gone along to Israel. And he says, if the Torah would be forgotten, what would I do? I would plant the seeds of flax, harvest it, dry it, weave nets in order to be able to capture a deer, slaughter it, make parchment, write on the parchment the 5 books of the Torah, take 5 children, teach each one of them one of the books of the Torah, and then they would each be proficient in one book. They would then be able to teach each other, and the Torah would be spread. And so Rebbe said, that's the way you get Torah. Number one, he could have just gone along and bought parchment. No, first he plants the flax seeds, he harvests the flax, he makes a net, he catches a deer. You need to work hard, but number 2, you need to make sure it gets spread out. Instead of teaching one man, one boy, all 5 books, he taught 5 books, 5 boys, 1 book each. They then they knew they didn't have it all themselves. They had to teach each other, and that's the way it spread out. Rav Chia is Rav's, also named out Rav Abba Richter, his uncle, and he teaches him this concept here of being able to teach many others. Yes, Ralph, you're about to ask a question, I think.
Sorry, you didn't actually tell us why they wouldn't give him smicha in Israel in the first place. Why did they not get it? Why did they refuse? Must have a reason to refuse him.
Don't know. I'm not too sure. I think we'll have to go along to if you have, look at the Gemara Sanhedrin 5a. Should we try and find that? If you want, we can open the Gemara Sanhedrin 5a now, and we can have a look at it if you want, Raf. You can see that. Just going to leave Babylon alone for a moment and go back to the land of Israel. Now, of course, whilst we're doing this, Ralph has gone looking for another book, so he's not going to hear the first 3 sentences. He's then going to come back and hear the second half and ask me a question.
I can hear.
Good, you can hear. Ralph, why don't you wait till after the share and we'll have a look. I'll put it up on the screen. It's Sanhedrin 5a, and you can see that, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, no. In Israel at this point, you still have a number of great scholars. Just want to have a look at 2 of them. The first one is Rabbi Yochanan, not to be confused with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is a Tana living at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. He was the one who convinced Vespasian to allow the yeshiva system in Yavne to continue. That's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai from the time of destruction of the temple in the year 70. Here we're speaking about Rabbi Yochanan, who is in Israel in around the year 2. He starts off 230. His father is Napcha, Rabbi Yochanan ben Napcha. The Gemara describes, there is a fascinating Gemara. Make sure you pull up the right one. And when you learn that Gemara, Baba Metzia 84a. This one here. Open that one here. Baba Metzia, move you out of the way, 84a. So, Rabbi Yochanan. Now, earlier on this page, the Gemara speaks about the beauty of these people, the physical beauty of these people, their size, their corpulence. Remember, we learned in Gemara yesterday that the women would like to wear choker necklaces because it caused them to have a double chin, because being fat was a good thing in those days. And earlier on in this piece of Gemara here, they said that when 2 rabbis stood together, we don't need to have that one. We don't have that one here because they're too fat. When Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Elazar would meet each other, it was possible for a pair of oxen to fit between their bellies without touching them. That's how fat they were. I think it's slight exaggeration, but it's pointing out that, don't worry, they were fat. They must also have been very tall for the oxen to go underneath. And they would then ask how on earth they could have children, but we'll leave that alone for the moment, how selfish was. Rabbi Yochanan was one of the beautiful people of Jerusalem. If you wanted to see the beauty of Rabbi Yochanan, bring a shiny new silver goblet from the smithy, fill it with red pomegranate seeds, place a diadem of red roses upon the lip of the goblet, position it between the sunlight and the shade, and that luster that you're going to get is a semblance of Rabbi Yochanan's beauty. Now, what happens? Rabbi Yochanan is one day sitting by, let's make sure we got him. Rabbi Yochanan is sitting bathing in the Jordan River. Bearing in mind he's in the yeshiva in Tiberias. So he's up north, you've got the Kinneret, and you've got the Jordan River that feeds into the Kinneret and then goes on down as well to the Yam HaMelech. And Rish Lakish sees him, and he jumps into the River Jordan to pursue him. And Rish Lakish at that point was a leader of a band of marauders. He had been a gladiator in the Roman circus. And Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, if you're able to swim like that, your strength is fit for Torah study. And Rish Lakish says, your beauty is fit for women. So Rabbi Yochanan said to him, if you give up your life of a bandit and instead learn Torah, I'll give you my sister in marriage who's even more beautiful than me. Interesting what he would give up his sister in marriage to someone who was obviously a vagabond, but he obviously saw something within him. Resh Lakish immediately accepted, and once he does that, he jumps back in the river to go get his clothes, but he's not able to because he's left his physical strength. Once he accepted the learning of Torah study, he loses his strength. So Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish are there. They are living in Israel. Resh Lakish ends up being Rabbi Yochanan's brother-in-law, and we have throughout the Talmud they're mentioned. Now, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish set up, and they are the main authors of the Jerusalem Talmud. Next week, we'll learn more about the Jerusalem Talmud because that gets completed in around the year 340, 350. At the same time that Hillel sets up the calendar is the same time when Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan has since passed away. He passes away already in the year 280. But it's based a lot on what him and his brother-in-law study that the Jerusalem Talmud is founded upon. We call it Talmud Yerushalmi. The English name for it is the Palestinian Talmud. Let's remember the name Palestine is given to the Jews. It's not until 1967 that that name gets stolen, prolonged, and grabbed and given to a group of other people. But initially, for the first 2,000 years of its existence, the word Palestine, not to be confused with Pelishtim. The Philistines are not Palestinians. The Philistines were Gazans. That's where the Pelishtim lived. But Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish are living in Israel, and they set up the foundation for what would be with the Jerusalem Talmud. Rav, I said, passes away in the year 247. Shmuel passes away in the year 297. Their yeshivas are set up very well. Unfortunately, a number, Rav Shmuel's student passes away within a year of Shmuel passing away. And so within a very short period of time, instead of being able to hear from the teacher or from the student, you're having to hear from the student's student, which is why the office of the Reish Galusa was so important. We've mentioned him already, Mar Ukva, and then we continue on. Ukva Bar Nehemiah continued this office of Reish Galusa, which gives the Jews the serenity, peace of mind, the tranquility, use any word you want to, in order to be able to continue their studies. And so for the next 300 years until the Talmud gets locked, by and large, things go well. Not always. And sorry?
Can I just ask you, what's the difference between two questions? Why the Jerusalem Talmud as opposed to the Babylonian Talmud? If there was one already, why a new one in Jerusalem? And secondly, is there a difference between them?
So number one, the Jerusalem Talmud is before the Babylonian Talmud, the other way around. So your question is, why the Babylonian Talmud? Yeah. The difference between them is just a collection of sayings. So the Jerusalem Talmud is the collection of sayings of the rabbis in Israel. The Babylonian Talmud is a collection of sayings of the rabbis in Babylon. That's why there are two of them. The difference is twofold. Number one, the Jerusalem Talmud has got a lot on the order of Zeroim, which deals with all the agricultural law, of course, was not applicable in Babylon. I mentioned that when Rav set up the yeshiva in Surah, and also the one in Pumbedis, there was a orchard around it. How do we know of this orchard? Because when they're discussing the laws of Orla, of fruit in the first 3 years, the wise, the sharp men of Pumbedisia said, you don't need to take Orla. And we know because of the trees that were planted here by Shmuel around then. So it wasn't the law, agricultural laws didn't apply in Babylon. In Israel, they did apply. And so therefore they discussed them a lot more there. So a lot of it would have been discussing what they needed. In the Jerusalem Talmud doesn't discuss second day Yom Tov, because why would it? The Babylonian Talmud does, because it applied to them. The other difference is the Jerusalem Talmud is a lot shorter, a lot more succinct. The Babylonian Talmud is much lengthier, and the arguments are far deeper. The reason being is because the Jerusalem Talmud was done in Israel with that unbroken chain from Hillel going onwards. The fact that it petered out in the beginning of the 4th century, which is why it got closed at that point, but they had a much stronger tradition. There wasn't the necessity to discuss so much. If you remember, we learned last week from Rav Shiriragon, when he describes the development of the Mishnah, the reason why Rebbe wrote the Mishnah down, even though the halacha is it may not be written down, was because he sees that people are arguing more. Hillel and Shammai didn't argue. They disagreed 6 times, but they didn't argue. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue, not over what the halacha is, or arguing, what did the rabbis say? And so therefore, that's what needs to be written down. That continues in the Jerusalem Talmud, but the Jerusalem Talmud is far less argumentative because they were working, in the words of the Talmud, they were searching in a well-lit room. Whereas the Babylonian Talmud, they were searching for something in a darkened room, and therefore they had to argue more. And numerous times when having the Babylonian Talmud, an argument, and the Talmud suggests numerous arguments, which are, like, why on earth? It has to go through the incorrect ones before the right one. But let's not give away all the secrets of the Talmud now. We need to save that for next week and the week afterwards. And we're going to finish a little bit early, but I want to pull up the last piece of Talmud, which those of us doing Daf Yomi should have learned yesterday. Nachri, sorry, can you close the door, please? So, the Gemara relates, one day they said to Rav, a great tall man came to Nahardia and he was limping. And he's discussing about this kalila. A kalila is a different type of, we're discussing with what a woman may go out on Shabbos. So we're talking about a different tiara that she's able to wear. And we're discussing whether or not the main part of it is gold and silver, or it's mainly a woven product which has all of the diamonds sewn into it. And so, Rav says, a great tall man that limps, that must be Levi. Why do we know this? Levi had wanted to show, we previously learned in the Gemara Brachos, we came across this man before, about how you prostrate yourself. So we discuss about the various different times, a regular person during davening, a regular person, the Kohen Gadol, or a king. The more senior your position, the longer you need to remain fully prostrated. The reason why is because your position can lead you to a sense of haughtiness. So we only in the Amida, we bend and bow twice at the beginning and twice at the end. And if somebody says, well, I'm going to be a frum, I'm going to bow, shut them, stop. Don't do that. You're not that great that you need to bow down that many times. But Levi wanted to be able to show what was the full prostration. And he describes how he would go the whole way down until he was resting on his fingertips. And then you push yourself up without bending your knees, using just the power of your fingertips and your hamstrings without bending your knees. He did that, but he pulled a muscle and he ended up limping with it for the rest of his life. So a great tall man who limps, there's only one guy at the time who can be that be Levi. And therefore, we must conclude that Rabbi Ephes has passed away and Rabbi Chanina is now sitting at the head of the yeshiva. And how do we know that? In Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, Levi's got no one to sit and study, and he comes along here. What's the background to the study, to the story here? After Rebbe passed away, Rebbe said that Rabbi Chanina should take over the yeshiva. But Rabbi Chanina didn't want to because Rabbi Ephes was older than him, 2 years older than him. So he says, you take over the yeshiva. But Rabbi Chanina wasn't going to sit in the study hall. It would have been embarrassing. He was meant to be the teacher. He should sit there, so he would sit outside. Levi felt bad for Rabbi Chanina, so he'd sit outside with him. So now that Levi's along, he must say that Rabbi Ephes has passed away. The Gemara then asks the question, who says that Rabbi Ephes passed away? Maybe Rabbi Chanina passed away. Why do we say that the guy inside passed away and he's here now because Rabbi Chanina has gone in? Maybe the other way around. Maybe Rabbi Chanina has passed away. So the Gemara gives the answer over there. That maybe it's Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Ephes is there and Levi's got no one to study with. That goes along. They says it can't be because if Rabbi Chanina had passed away, then Levi now has got no reason to sit outside the yeshiva. He would have gone and learnt with Rabbi Ephes inside. It's only out of respect for Rabbi Chanina he stayed outside. And how do you know? This is why I wanted to bring this piece here. How do you know It has to be that Rabbi Hanina is still alive, because when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi passed away, he said that Rabbi Hanina, son of Rabbi Chama, will sit at the head of the yeshiva. And of the righteous it is written, you will decree a saying and they will be established for you. And so therefore, it must be that Rabbi Hanina is going to be the head of the yeshiva. And therefore, we can't say that he was the one who passed away, and that's why Levi has come along. It must be Rabbi Ephes, who's inside, has passed away. Now Rabbi Hanina is now the head of the yeshiva. Levi no longer has a study partner. That's why he's come to Babylon. The reason why I wanted to share that one with you is, number one, I found it absolutely fascinating that yesterday's piece of Gemara that we're doing should dovetail so perfectly with the century that we picked. Of all the times we could have picked on, it was absolutely today's century. And if you carry on with there, it also describes that once they gave permission for this Khalil to be worn, then, let me just pull it up again to make sure we get it the right way around. If you remember the continuation of this, once they said that once it was taught, then in Naharadia, 24 women went out wearing the Kalila ornament on Shabbos. 24 of them. Whereas when they taught it in Mechoza, 18 women from one alleyway went out. The difference between Nahardia and Mechoza. Now, in the entire town of Nahardia, only 24 women could afford this tiara. In Mechoza, on one single street, there were 18 women, just to show the difference between the towns, and possibly that is why Shmuel set up his yeshiva Nahardia. We said at the beginning, lack of wealth can be an advantage because you're not disturbed by it. But the other reason why I wanted to mention that one today is because this is how the continuation of the rabbinate went. Number one, we've got that reassurance. Rabbi said that Rav Hanina will be the Rosh Hashiva. So when Levi turns up, Rav, who even though Rabbi wouldn't give him semicha, still respected, he must have respected the word of Rabbi. Rabbi was the author of the redactor of the Mishnah. If he says that Rabbi Hanina will be the Rosh Hashiva, then that is going to be a fact. So if somebody's passed away, it can't be him because he has not yet become the Rosh Hashiva. But the other thing is that each one knew that they had a place there. Previously, we had with the argument in yeshiva earlier on that when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was made as the head of this in times of the temple, made the head of yeshiva, the two rabbis who'd been arguing came in and they sat down there. So why didn't Rabbi Hanina sit down in the yeshiva? At times, Rabbi Hanina knew he was meant to be Rosh Hashiva. He allowed Rabbi Ephes, who was 2 years older than him, but he knew that if he sat there, then Rabbi Ephes would not be able to act as the real head. Because everybody was saying, well, Rabbi wanted Rabbi Hanina to be it. So he sat outside the yeshiva. It wasn't because he was being haughty. It was because he knew that you can't have a yeshiva which has got 2 heads. Even if one of them is a real head, another one, if you have that, then you've got this famous story in the Gemara when Elijah goes along and he visits a town when no one is nice to him, and he says, may you all become rabbis. And one of the person that was with Elijah says, I don't understand. And then he went to another town when they were lovely to him. He says, may you have one great big rabbi. He says, it's the wrong way around. And Elijah says, no. Where they're nice to me, they should have one big rabbi. You have one clear halachic authority. The town when they were all, too many cooks spoiled the broth. So Rav Hanina sat outside of the yeshiva and he allowed Rabbi Ephes to have his turn. When he passed away, Rav Hanina goes in. Levi, who has been studying with Rav Hanina, knows if he comes in now, he's going to be doing the same thing. He's going to usurp. If any of the students disagreed with Rav Hanina, they go, Levi, what do you were his chavrusa for many years. You'll be able to tell us. That's why you should only have one halachic authority. Babylon, which had two separate yeshivas, there is at times a little bit of machlokes, although, and with this we will end, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us, kinas seifrim tarbe chochma, the jealousy of scribes or of teachers increases wisdom. Actually, the two yeshivas of Surim Pumbedisa had their own heads, but because of that, there was this healthy opposition towards it, and this healthy competition, which increased the learning. That takes us to the end of today's century. Next week, when we do the 4th century, we will have the completion of the Jerusalem Talmud. We will have the calendar as set by Hillel II. I didn't manage to get too much about the Zoroastrians or about the Samaritans. My apologies, but basically the Zoroastrians caused a little bit of trouble for the Jews in Babylon, but then we got rid of them. They institute it's possible to say that at that point is when the Haftarah, according to some, was added in, according to others was done by the Persians, but we'll leave them alone. But the one thing that does also happen next week is you've got the adoption by Rome of Christianity and what that will do. At the moment, the Christians are still a troublesome sect, but they've not yet become an official religion. Gentlemen, that takes us towards the end. Ralph, did you find your answer? Did you manage to get it up there? Sanhedrin 5a?
I've got it here, but I haven't read it yet, so I'll have to read it.
I tell you so.
Tell me not to read. You said to me later. You said do it later.
He listens. He listen. I don't know. Have a lovely time. David, was it worth giving up an hour's work?
Definitely. Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Have a good week. Les, how are you? You okay with that one?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Good. Right, let's stop the recording.